means that it will be implemented as a phone feature, not filtered through a mobile system operator. So those of us that own the spectrum that finds its way into these services will not be having to filter ourselves through third parties. It's a direct-to-device capability.
You still need the device manufacturers to cooperate, correct?
Well, the device manufacturers will inevitably bring this in. This is back to the timing. So we pivoted to 5G because the ATSC 3.0 edge device ecosystem, which we were pursuing, you may remember, before Castanet 5G, there was Synthesis Cloud. Synthesis Cloud was all about ATSC 3.0 mobility and what we were doing with Auton, and we were way down the road, but we could not, the investment community and the rest, when the LG lawsuit came up, and the Constellation Designs infringement lawsuit, which is still not settled. Is it settled yet? As of last week, it wasn't. So there's an appeal. So that put a cloud on ATSC 3 from the manufacturer's side. And we were just sitting there spinning our tires for the better part 3-4 months.
So you pivoted?
Well, we didn't pivot on purpose. We pivoted because the 3GPP dropped the ball, or made the 5G broadcast incorporated in Release 16. Now, at what point does Qualcomm and other chipset fabs bring what's now called Band 108 into production is driven by a few things. They're, the Qualcomms and the roadies, they're looking for the existing incumbent customers to make a big order. And until they see that, it's not on the front burner, but it's in the queue. So what we've been told is pre-production 5G broadcast receivers integrated into, next generation releases, mid-year 26, a year later, probably about a year to get into mass market devices. So you're probably looking at mid-year 27. What we've been working on in the meantime are software-defined receivers to do demonstrations and trials, but it's a 2-year, future before those devices show up en masse.
I'll be honest, that still sounds optimistic to me, but I'm curious, what are your takeaways from what you said or thoughts? You support it?
I can show you phones operating with ATSC 3 today.
Oh, yeah.
But what? So I'm not sure what you want me to compare.
Well, the difference between the phones that operate ATSC 3 today versus a mass deployment from a Qualcomm who's already in the phones that are out there in our hands, that's a big difference. Okay. You have to get the market to adopt those 3.0 phones versus Qualcomm to get it out in the phones.
I can assure you that when a country like India with 1.4 billion people make ATSC 3 D to M, known in India as D to M, the national mobile standard, that the first one to jump on board is going to be a fight between MediaTek and Qualcomm, and probably ahead of them will be some Chinese manufacturers who are probably already building the dang thing.
So that's a fair argument.
But the point is those are those SoCs go into every device that we buy today.
Fair. I'm okay with that argument. One thing though that still, I respect HC2 for a number of different reasons.
Nobody's arguing their right to do what they did.
One thing that is somewhat telling for a low power space, while they might not be out there as thought leaders or trying to be leaders in the industry in events like this, they are leaders in the industry in terms of the mass of the spectrum and what they've done to build that spectrum. They, in the same market where they're doing this request in Fort Wayne, they were 3.0 stations. And so now they're requesting to pivot to 5G. That's, if you're in the low power space and you're not in the technical weeds.
Well, their pivot is a request for an experimental or an STA. That's the pivot, right? They're not asking to be granted the right to broadcast other than outside of the realm of existing FCC regulatory rules. So everybody's got the right to do that. Anybody in this room can request an experimental license. You can request a special temporary authority to do a whole lot of things. They decided to do that, and that's I can applaud anybody who wants to experiment and find a better way.
Does it concern you at all?
No,
Okay. So if they move forward and are successful getting their permission to do this,
To do this being the
to
experimental?
the experimental and to prove out 5G broadcast outside of the ATSC 3.0 standard, is there a concern?
By the way, I might help them for lots of reasons.
I'm gonna let you answer that. Go further. What reasons? Why?
What
Why?
reasons are-
Because if you're looking to support them, I'm sure they'll happily take it.
Look at, put them side by side.
Okay?
Put them side by side in the same market, in the same tower, at the same time. And you're going to have a clear winner. I'm not going to impugn the, I'll leave it there. I'll go back to Vern's statement. ATSC is the best broadcast standard in the world, bar none,
But
period.
it's okay to give some specifics. Why do you think 5G broadcast, in the way that they're looking to experiment it, why do you think that won't succeed?
It's all in your definition of success. What is success? I don't know what their definition of success is. My definition of success is getting the most value out of my spectrum. I could run down a list of reasons from the standpoint of overhead and efficiency and performance and probably 100 other things as reasons why I have chosen to ensure that ATSC is the best standard in the world. Their measure of success, everybody can have their own measure of success. But at the same time, it comes back to the fog that gets put on the broadcast industry by pushing for something other than ATSC 3 at this point in time is dangerous. It's dangerous to everybody in this room, because then the idea of departure brings to the foreground the FCC's view of, we've got spectrum to sell, and if you want to stay alive as a broadcaster, you do not want the FCC thinking that the next best thing they should be doing is putting your spectrum up for sale. That's the reasons that I wouldn't support a transition to 5G alone in this environment.
You can add to that if you want.
Yeah, I think, I think the key issue for me is definition of success is we have the right and the opportunity with this hybrid approach we're taking with the 5G broadcast.
I'm giving that one to you.
I know, thank you. To get a free ride into every 5G replacement phone starting in 2027, 28, 29, 30, give a 3-year replacement cycle. Every cell phone in the United States will receive low-power television signals modulated with the ATSC 3.0 transport layer and a 5G broadcast application layer. So my words are to say 5G broadcast becomes the killer app on top of ATSC 3.0, but wait, there's more, because we have the ability to use that other megahertz of bandwidth to participate in lots of other very innovative new things. BPS, for example, more reference signals out there from lots of low-power TV stations augmenting what will be the full powers umbrella for broadcast positioning services. Are you all familiar with what's going on with BPS?
We've talked about it quite a bit.
Okay, great.
ATBA.
So I think the flexibility of the hybrid solution brings multiple use case opportunities into our framework.
So, but a little bit of clarity here, okay, because this is where a lot of dust gets thrown up in the air and the fog descends and then you've got mud falling on the floor. So just because a phone has a 5G broadcast enabled chip does not bring 5G broadcast services into the phone. So, and forget about, the fact that you don't need a SIM card, all right? 5G broadcast at that level and that level alone, I'll grant, it's free, open, and receivable. Great. But at the same time, you need another antenna, probably two, to efficiently service the broadcast spectrum. By the way, you're never, ever going to get a low V antenna
Not at all.
into a phone. You'll be lucky if you can get it high V in, and that's probably the biggest holdback in terms of Brazil's decision with the spectrum that they're using, that mobility is not on their map.
Yeah, important to point out, band 108 is only UHF TV.
I understand that.
Okay, I
understand it, but what
I need
I'm
to-
saying is now you need an antenna, you need the front end filtering, you need the front end / tuner itself, and then what spills into the chip, the demodulator, is 5G broadcast. But those other pieces have to be an integral part of. I'm just pushing back and saying
I think
every
that's
phone
what-
in America.
I think that's what he's saying in the next couple of years. Is that correct?
Yeah, those are the features, obviously, that are being built into that next release. So remember, we're already up
Features
to
in the
release 18.
standard
Yes.
don't define what gets built.
No, of course not, absolutely not.
So, okay, I'm gonna go to the same topic though.
Yeah.
Our LPTV signals,
Yep.
we're limited to 15 kilowatts.
Yep.
Right? You know this. On top of this, we oftentimes have congested frequency space. We deal with interference, especially in major markets. What makes you think that we're gonna be successful reaching that phone, very small antenna, with our low power space? I get 5G broadcast might be accepted in the phone, but you still gotta be able to reach it from the link budget side of things.
Yep.
And on top of that, with mobility. When sometimes we're struggling to get that same signal into a fixed device in a home with an antenna in the attic, still struggling to get our same signal.
Here, here.
So you're telling me, Longley Rice says you gotta have the antenna on the roof, and now you're saying we have to have it in the phone driving 70 miles down the highway.
That's right.
So
And-
help me sell me on how this is gonna work.
So in our brave new world, obviously enough, we have this beautiful thing called distributed transmission systems to drop in gap fillers to harmonize the link budget within our protected contours. That's a really big piece of this. So in terms of how the future evolution of the system and the integration of that consortium, if you will, of low-power TV licensees that become the group of the willing to vend into this national concept, there will be a hybridization of the business cases wherever those signals are receivable. But the most important part is the economics of this transformation. So today, the cost to do a nice job at a ATSC 3.0 5G broadcast base station is about $250,000. That's the same cost as one single macro cell site. And that one, low power TV signal covers literally hundreds, and in some high density markets, thousands of cell sites within the protected contour. The OpEx for that site's about $5,000 a month. That's the same OpEx for each and every one of those cell sites. So our cost of goods delivered is, you put out a thing years ago that was brilliant, a penny a gigabyte per.
I remember one office, actually, Congressman magically appeared when I put on the table the money that,
But the distributed transmission system, from a low power standpoint, quite honestly, we're fairly limited.
So just time out. So from what we did our mobile testing in Portland, which was extensive, and this is 3.0, not the 5G overlay network, we were 65 miles away from the tower in Portland. We were still getting ATSC 3. So back
on
off.
a cell phone?
No, on the car, on the mobile
Autonomy.
device. So I'm simply saying that the 3.0, back to the robustness of 3.0, it's extraordinary. And so what the reception will be into a handheld device, both indoor and outdoor, will certainly not be like that. However, it will be plenty big enough to cover a significant portion of market opportunity, revenue generating opportunity that we don't enjoy today.
But the success of that seems like it would be somewhat predicated on multiple low powers coming together in a consortium,
Absolutely.
or in a given market, that distributed transmission system being fairly robust. And from my estimations, if I want to do a DTS system in my Dallas market, I'm limited to where it's almost pointless because of the 50/50, 50/90 requirements that make it to where basically I can have that strong link budget within a somewhat small circle of Dallas and not really my 51 dBU contour, which makes it difficult.
How are you designing them out at the edge?
You're only allowed to reach your 50/90.
Yeah. But
And it's difficult for us. We need some rule changes in order for the DTS to
you need
work.
some different pieces of hardware.
Well, and Dallas is an almost ideal market from a topology.
Oh,
I welcome you to come and show me.
Yeah.
No,
I've got some
I'm simply
stations.
saying that when you get to other areas of the country, even in Baltimore, we've done extensive field studies.
In low power or in?
No, in high power.
Yeah,
And if
we're
high
low
power,
power.
well, that's my point, right? If you chop another 10 dB off of the power equation, and in some cases certainly more than 15 kilowatts versus a million watts, let's see.
It's a big difference.
It's a big difference.
It's a big difference.
Right? It's a big
But
difference.
that's just it, Mark. We're low power. So we've got to have that strong link budget as low power in order to carry out these mobility
No, I understand
plans.
that, but I would not dissuade people from seeking a mobile, period. I'm simply saying that the idea of getting to that phone is a long ways off, but there are many other data services that again, some of the examples that you'll see at the ATSC booth, have conversations with the new joint venture EdgeBeam. There are business models that are not dependent on getting on the phone. We want to get in the phone because we always thought we should have been there in the first place, number one. Number two, there's a huge economic opportunity in India in getting into the phone. I can tell you none of this happens based on a dream. It happens upon having money and making money. And being willing to lose money.
We all know that one.
So Mark, back to the Indian driver. As you know, I introduced you to Parag. So I think the fact that you've been able to take it as you have is fantastic. I'd already spent my decade there, and I was ready to pass the baton. So
The prince told me.
in the context of the ecosystem behind the manufacturing of the edge devices, though, unless the Samsungs of the world decide to come and support the standard to sell in India, which they very well may, I assume that's part of your thinking. It's not just building an Indian manufactured base that we then import to the US. So
Those phones actually are not, the chips made in India, but the actual devices are made in a variety of countries.
Yeah, okay. So the key issue though is the scale of the ecosystem around 5G devices versus next generation ATSC 3.0 devices is a hugely asymmetric situation. And I think from an aspirational future, that just like I would say my idea of a hybrid under existing rules is the right way to go for harmonizing 5G and ATSC 3, where other folks may think, let's just go standalone and subject themselves to asking for permissions to make their life more complicated, is not the most efficient way. But while they do that, we'll still be deploying under the existing rules. So in that 5-year cycle that we're anticipating, at least I am, that a rulemaking in this space that will probably, no matter what decision the FCC makes, the other side will sue. So then we have more protraction. But I do believe that the supply chains and all the things that supply that massive existing ecosystem on 5G is a real hurdle to get over. And
I'll say it again, Vern. Anybody who wants to take the existing rulemaking and operate 5G broadcast inside of those rules,
yep.
I haven't got a complaint about that. And if people want to gamble their money on being able to get into that device as the way that they're going to make money, well, I'm going to ask you how you're going to make money to get to stand the time to get into that device.
One of the struggles, though, that the low power space has right now is the hardware, the transmitter vendors, the people who are creating the stuff that we have to then buy and put into our stations. There's uncertainty there, both because of the 5G and because where 3.0 is going. You know, it used to be, you know, it's constantly evolving, right? It used to be you gotta buy the hardware, now it's virtualized.
Yeah, but all these equipments at their root are software based. It's the very reason you buy you buy a transmitter today, buy an exciter today. It's do you want ATSC 1? Do you want ATSC 3? Do you want DVB for crying out loud? It's all software. So that piece is easy. All right. And by the way, so if it supports ATSC 3, it'll support the transport of anything that you want to put on an interstitial basis in between TV frames. Secondly, the cloud aspect of this means that you're not replacing hardware. It's an OpEx. It's a different overall economic view of how you run your business. By the way, most financial people go, holy crap, I'm so used to writing this stuff on. How do I make this happen?
But that's if you're going 3.0.
If you go 3.0 with 5G interstitial, call it whatever. First we gotta come up with a good name.
You come up with a better name than
All right.
interleaving, interstitial. I mean, you come up with something. So if I'm an LPTV broadcaster and I'm going to buy a new transmitter, should I basically make sure I buy a Rodian Schwartz because I want to make sure I've got the potential of 3.0 and 5G because I don't know who's going to win out?
Yes.
I had a feeling you were going to say that. Like, because this is where some of the uncertainty comes. We're low power. We don't have much money to put into this to begin with. We don't want to make missteps, right? Is there a chance 5G broadcast as a standalone will succeed? I know nobody can really speak to that. You don't know. We have Comark in our deployments, right?
Yes.
And it's only 3.0. That's all that they'll do, or 1.0, of course. Should I be putting money in towards 5G just in case?
Your exciter, all right, is being driven by a packager. That packager is delivering to the endpoint all of the information that an exciter needs to make a waveform. I don't think it cares what it gets.
It doesn't.
All right, because at the end of the day, you know, look at, there are other ways, by the way, we could let's get into the O-RAN space. If you had an O-RAN-based radio, it's IQ and it doesn't matter. So I don't think the argument is, there's no sound argument to say, I'm not gonna buy ATSC 3 because 5G interstitial might come along. I don't see that as, the chance of that is near zero. Now, I know that.
It's a software app. It literally, it's the hardware is irrelevant. The only hardware that matters anymore is an amplifier and antennas. Everything down below is off-the-shelf generic servers or a remote, internet or satellite connection to a cloud origination server.
So
It's a whole new ballgame.
I'm
How
gonna
do we get everybody who has the old ballgame in ATSC 1.0 sitting here listening to all this? What do you guys do to survive? I just told you it's gonna take 2 years before what we're working on becomes mainstream. We have lots of proof and concepts and things to do in the meantime, but we take full awareness and responsibility. There has to be a financing component to working in that consortium.
Yeah, okay, but
And that's a big
look,
piece.
if we're gonna talk the financing side of things.
Yeah, there has to be.
You know full well,
How hard that is.
I've spent
Yep.
many years
Yeah,
talking to the largest investment groups on the planet,
yep.
right? And it used to be, by the way, something where the 3.0 component was a secret sauce, and it was a positive thing. Now I'm being told, don't mention 3.0 at all.
Yeah.
Say nothing about ATSC because it's only got negative press.
It's only got negative press, but I think that what you will read in the news tomorrow, as a result of the press conference that was held earlier today, will, in the financial community, lend itself very differently than it ever has in the past. Because again, you've got 4 of the largest broadcasters saying they are all in on data casting. They are all in on data casting. Now that's news to any investor's ears because what we all know, by the way, one of the other points we made very clear, No broadcaster today has a valuation based upon any value placed on its spectrum. Zero, zip, none. So once you create value because of that spectrum, forget the ongoing business that you're in, forget the dollars you're collecting for bits. The value, as seen from Wall Street, the value in the investment community then gets tied to spectrum, and then that starts equating to megahertz pops and megahertz pops bits, and it's a very different equation when it
I hope you're right.
I know
hope
I'm
you're
right. I know
The-
I'm
the-
right.
The struggle I have with the thought process is most of the full power broadcasters, their stocks are struggling.
Yeah.
The markets are not,
Tell me about
not
it.
looking
I
positive
can't
for them.
retire, sorry.
So the notion that all of a sudden that's gonna turn around because of one press release seems difficult.
But it's not one press release.
Yeah, but you understand the sentiment of what I'm saying. It's difficult for the low power space. And furthermore.
Well, I'm not saying you're gonna go out, tomorrow and go to the market and say, well, not because of this press release.
Buy Sinclair
I'm
stock, that's
suddenly-
what he's saying. So here's the struggle I have for both of you. Low power, we're often the canary in the coal mine, right? When it comes to the ATSC side, we don't really have much
representation
there, right? We don't feel very valued there by,
Well,
and now I know it's,
Oh, no, hold on,
it's a
hold on.
standard.
You can't place that on ATSC because in fact,
There's a-
ATSC
there's-
has no politics.
I believe that, I
All
believe
right.
that. But in terms of presence for LPTV, there's very little presence, whether that's by choice or not seeing a reason to
It's a
participate.
volunteer
Fair.
SDO.
There's an even smaller presence of low power TV in 3GGP. You know, if you're talking about the vastness of devices and how many units are out there, yeah, well, if you're talking about presence and participation, 3GGP wouldn't know what LPTV even stood for.
We're at about 350 stations, so I wouldn't go too far down that road.
3GGP is much bigger. I mean, like
Yes.
it's big. So I'm not saying that as a hit against either ATSC or 3GGP.
Yeah.
I'm saying, how should low power television respond to that? We're
So I can make some controversy now. So
Oh, I was
I guess
trying.
you advertise this as controversial. So full power broadcasters, the amazing work you guys did with the lighthouses, with BitPath, and now the data
Because it
casting.
was the only course we had.
I know that, but it's, you know, it's, however it evolved, it's been the nature of the beast. And the word data casting gives me shivers up my spine. The full power broadcast industry has never used the word broadcast internet because the spectrum is tied up.
That's not true. If you look at Sinclair's positioning,
Okay.
all right, we drove that broadcast internet.
Okay. Look,
So
all I'm talking
you
about
can,
is.
you talk about the rest of the broadcasters,
Okay.
Powerland, but.
That's fine.
But not this
to
one.
But to this
And
audience.
Jerry Fritz right there will attest to that.
But, and he's done a great job. So to this audience of low power TV licensees though, participating in broadcast internet is a full spectrum of 6 megahertz available for broadcast internet. In the context of the full powers, because of the obligation of the simulcast, your available spectrum is constrained.
wait, I'm gonna go back to that now. So what you just said would be in agreement with the HC2 filing.
No, I don't think that's
not-
what he's
that's
saying
nothing
at
to
all.
do with
With returns.
No, what-
It's sitting a full 6 megahertz towards broadcast internet versus a linear free over the air channel.
He was talking about the utilization of the spectrum.
How much
right?
is available for data casting versus broadcast internet?
Exactly. And so from a spectrum utilization standpoint, the ability of low powers to flash cut without having to go through this BS of lighthouses and, you know,
How do you really
I
feel
got
about
5 guys and I gotta give everybody the same amount of spectrum. How you use that choice, you know, your slice of the
That's
spectrum.
what you're referencing.
That's exactly
That was
what I'm
the
referencing.
Okay, continue, sorry.
So,
This audience is sitting on a gold mine of underutilized, undervalued spectrum that's being typically monetized by.
If
it's
they have
part of
the money
market
to mine
operation. If they have
If
the
they have
money
the
to
money
mine
to
it,
mine it.
or the willingness to join in with a consortium of the
Okay.
willing to go raise that money. That's the key.
and look, my very simplistic view is never changed. All right? Think of high power broadcasting as the brick think of low power as the mortar, and if we all move in the same direction, towards the same goals, we've got a solid wall. If we don't do that, we've got a stone wall that can be pushed over by anybody.
But I don't see a whole, I believe, I know you've been there, because you've been consistent with that. But you don't necessarily represent all of the full power broadcasters. You're you, and you've got a different perspective, which is why you started with ATBA to begin with years ago. What low power has felt, if low power is the mortar for full power, and we all move together in a unified fashion, why isn't there more overlap between the full power groups and the low power?
Because there's no money yet. Because nobody has collected real money. And when we start collecting real money, there will be a move towards everybody who's got spectrum.
Drinks for everyone, he said it.
No, seriously, and that's why, it's incredibly difficult. By the way, I do remember a time when I received the ATBA Persistence and Perseverance Award.
There's no question, you have been consistent with that.
And I know it's harder for a low power guy who doesn't know everything that's going on. They don't have the voice that the high powers have. But it has taken this long to get 4 broadcasters to say the same thing. So, by the way, anybody who doesn't know me, I'm never yelling. I'm just applying passion to my voice.
Okay, so here's another one for you then. The moving for a low power, if they have the money, if they choose to spend that money, for a low power to move towards a new standard of any kind, to shift towards a new business model beyond the traditional Diginet business model, obviously there's some risk that goes into that. And what we're seeing, because the value of UHF has changed over the last decade or two, we went through the auction, we found our new home, we built our new home. Now, we're always feeling like we're at risk because somebody else now wants our new home because UHF is better. So it's almost like if you've got a UHF frequency and there's any congestion in the market, there's a good chance the full power guys are gonna come and take that frequency because they happen to have a VHF and they wanna move again. What can you say to the low power that says, okay, we know we keep stepping on your toes, your secondary, deal with it, but stick with it? How do you encourage the low power to still make those moves towards 3.0 if there's that constant risk that the full power is going to take that frequency?
I don't know that anyone can possibly answer that question.
It's risk.
Look, we just went through 5 years of
Painful.
And we, for the first time in a decade plus, we have a stable,
frequency changes.
We have a stable footprint. And now we have business as usual for moves, adds, and changes. So I think the idea, any full power that's on a V today, are any substantive full power still on a V?
Well, I think all the ones that we have are in the process of being changed.
Yeah, I rest my case. So back to
But by the way, that doesn't mean, okay, I pity any soul who's in low V. I'm sorry, that's just, other than conventional television with big antennas, which does have its place, all right? It's not a huge marketplace, but it does have its place. The high V is exceptionally useful. In the world of data casting, look at, no money is being collected today, but I can tell you that we have contracts dependent on proof of service that will yield money very, very soon. So, many of those, high V is probably in many ways a better place to be because they're outdoor related services.
But won't those contracts be contracts that Sinclair enjoys, not necessarily us in this room?
Well, in certain markets, certainly, but low powers exist in markets that high power struggles to reach as UHF. As I said, I can take the example of Baltimore and say, boy, wouldn't I like to have something on the other side of the mountain ridge that stands between a 1 megawatt UHF and the city of Westminster, or the city of Bel Air, where you're talking tens, close to hundreds of thousands of people.
For any of you low power folks in here, you just heard Sinclair's interest in buying your station if you happen to be in that range. He told you right there, right? Okay.
That's not what
look,
I said, that's what Josh said.
He's like, I don't speak on behalf of Sinclair while I'm here. Okay, so I don't know what the cost is to go on the 5G side of things. Obviously, if it's within 3.0,
It's
it's the
exactly,
same.
it's exactly the same.
One of the
Same.
struggles that would be, I would think, a push to go outside of the 3.0 for 5G, I could be wrong, is the incredible expense of the A3SA requirements that I don't understand it all completely, but from what I understand, what little I understand, there's quite an expense for a broadcaster in the low power space to go through the A3SA standard and to be acceptable as a full 3.0 broadcaster.
Well, A3SA, you're talking about DRM
Yeah, and signaling.
and signaling.
Signaling.
Yeah, I know that on the signaling side, there's work underway that's gonna dramatically lower the signaling side, the signal signing side of that equation. You know, and then, by the way, there's only so much that A3SA themselves are responsible for, because there's the other tag-along costs that they have no responsibility for. On the DRM front, DRM still is not a mandatory on the part of the networks, but it's the networks that are doing that to protect their high-value content. So any programming outside of a product that someone is saying you've got to protect, you don't need DRM.
I understand the DRM side, but if in order for me to do it, let's say I've got my diginets, right?
Yeah. Well, I think I know where you're going, and I'm gonna go back to something I said at the beginning. So the work that's soon to surface inside of ATSC around multicasting, all right, it is to enable your pipe to become invisible to a telecom provider. The very same bits, in the very way that they have formed it, go directly across your spectrum into a 5G or future 6G enabled device, directly to those applications, without having to go through the conundrum of what television, ill-advised on my part, but they don't always listen to me, as opposed to going straight through the layers, right? I mean, part of the problem with ATSC today in that environment is layers 2 and 3 are fused together. So in that view of the world, we are literally in the process of making ATSC3 I don't know if I want to call it a bent pipe, but it's a transparent pipe to the bits that flow across the telecom networks. Totally.
Okay, but if we're talking about the quality of a 3.0.
And the reason I'm saying that, by the way, is that then that whole issue of A3SA goes away, because you're actually binding yourself to that telecom network as an extension to that network. In much of the same way that for a while you had LTE Advanced using 700 megahertz spectrum. It was envisioned for download only.
Yep.
And the problem was the bearer was not a very good bearer. Had it been ATSC3, it might have been
And it was capped at 2,000 watts.
Yeah.
But some of the
So-
struggle that we have, we've got this delete deregulation that is being asked about right now. And obviously, all of the different groups are thinking through what they want to ask for removal of. We don't want to be regulated any more than we absolutely have to, right? This is our nature.
Mhm.
And we're trying to run businesses that are difficult enough as it is. To have more regulation makes it difficult. Sometimes it feels like we're getting some of those same regulations that are coming from the standards side of things, when some of those standards that we might be required to, that are gonna cost extra, aren't necessarily what we're utilizing or caring for. to begin with.
Look at, I think, again, the marketplace will define what's bearable and what's not bearable. There are devices that are in the pipeline today that are taking advantage of the nature of the standard to, for example, you don't need, sorry Dolby, you don't need AC4
Exactly.
to listen to a cell phone. You don't need it. So broadcasters, you're gonna find broadcasters offering a second audio channel, some AAC-based channel. The decision whether it's HEAAC-V2 or XHEAAC, that decision has not been made. But
Except for low powers, it's an optional choice.
of course there's an option.
And that's where there's a
And that's
huge
my point.
difference.
I'm saying that there are lots of ways to, to thread the needle, to get into the hands of the public the devices they're willing to consume.
And broadcast internet is the secret sauce to offset all of the headwinds you've been talking about. So.
Long live broadcast internet.
Absolutely.
But
It
I think,
it went into the Federal Registry on March 21st, 2021. And almost, how many people in this room know about broadcast internet? 3. That's silly. We should all know that. And I think the fact that it is your right to participate under that banner today, to do all kinds of really cool stuff, is our failure to educate the industry. I've been off the air. You guys haven't seen my face in 2 years. I've been quiet, staying under the radar, keep my head down, keep my mouth shut, doing the hard work. And so this NAB was, because of all this stuff going on, it was time to stand up again and start to let people know there is real progress taking place on the technology side, on the business case side, on the monetization side, and on the regulatory and standard side. That is directly to the benefit of the low-powered television licensees.
so, we could probably talk about this all night, but I'm guessing people are probably getting tired and ready to wrap it
To
up.
discuss it all night, there'd have to be a bottle of bourbon sitting there.
Downstairs. So tonight there is going to be the ATBA reception. It's right downstairs in the ballroom that you had to pass to get here. Starts at 6 o'clock, right? Yes. 6 o'clock. Before we wrap up, any final words that you want to throw out there about 3.0 or 5G broadcast? Or LPTV?
Up with broadcast internet, down with ATSC 1. It's gonna be the new bumper sticker.
By the way,
It'll be sitting alongside the one that says, life is hard, it's harder if you're an idiot.
so you mentioned something about the down with 1.0. We didn't really talk about this, but the people in this room, they're making their living on 1.0.
Oh, I know that.
They're making their living because of the Diginets and sub-channels.
Yep.
So how will they survive if you tell them away with 1.0?
No, don't sign contracts more than 2 years. Seriously.
That's not a good answer.
No, it is
You
good.
can't say just don't sign contracts longer than 2 years.
It is, if you want.
'Cause I gotta pay my mortgage more than 2 years
Hold on.
out.
Josh, it comes back to, look at, a few folks in this room probably know who Roku is, right? So imagine a Roku-like device plugs into the HDMI port of that ATSC 1 television set that will never do HDR, it'll never do 4K, all right? That costs you less than $30.
So your argument is the received devices.
The device, the device
set-top box.
ecosystem, again, device ecosystem follows certainty. When there is certainty that ATSC 1 will end, then you will have thousands of providers of goods and services and hardware into the ATSC 3 environment.
I know you don't speak for NAB, but in the request for the rulemaking, they didn't reference LPTV at all. It was only full power, and they referenced the major markets and the markets beyond.
Well, perhaps you should do something about that.
I'm just curious if there was a thought there. we'll leave that there. Go for it.
So
Final words.
So, MPEG 4, I mean, in terms of the things that are happening in ATSC 1.0 that are kind of interesting, that are starting to proliferate to get more capacity out of the ATSC 1.0 legacy. But my point about the things will happen fast. As Mark points out, they've been working, our group's been working, things will happen fast. So when I said don't sign contracts on your spectrum that will tie you up for more than 2 years at any given time, maybe 2 years from now, I'd say don't sign a contract for more than a year. I don't know exactly the crossroads of the point where your destiny improves as licensees, but it's that soon. And we've all waited. I've been at this for 18 years. I stood in front of what used to be this organization, I think in 07 or 08.
I was 10, I don't know.
Yeah, you were.
I've got some of the original posters, but.
Yeah. So we have all gone through ridiculous amounts of pain and suffering to maintain this opportunity this is the last best spectrum consolidation opportunity that has existed since what Nextel did in the specialized mobile radio business, to take a bunch of small push-to-talk radio operators and make the fourth cellular carrier that over a decade went from a bunch of guys just like me with big ideas and hard work. 10 years later, it sold to Sprint for $32 billion. So this industry, the low power TV industry, 3 times more stations than full power, together, finding ways to hold hands and collaborate together, maintain your ownership, partner in, sell your station into a consortium, whatever it may be. You have come a long way. If you're still here, by the way, you're still here. You've survived the frickin' repack. I mean, goodness gracious. Anybody in this room is a survivor. So I think the future for low power TV has never been brighter. And in the short term, it's never been more, crazy and challenging. So just hold your breath and hang on.
I obviously asked a lot of different questions to both sides. I want to say, ATBA exists because we're all about the advancement of television, right? And we're focused on that for low power television. There's going to be disagreements.
But there's also a big B in there called broadcasting.
Low power television, yeah, broadcast television, that's what I meant. So we're focused on LPTV. I would say, I know I asked about, some of the contracts and stuff. Look, we want to sign contracts, and we'll sign longer than the 2-year. There's just got to be clauses that the standard can change within that time frame. And if the full power guys are successful in getting receivers out there and the mandates, then it will make a difference with the viewers in 3.0, just like it would in the viewers in 1.0.
And 5G.
And 5G. I would say the debate it's a healthy thing. It's okay to have the debate.
Well, I think we actually came to, as I said, I fully support.
Yeah, you guys did, but my guess is there are those that will hear this that said, you're missing my perspective. It's okay. Let's have open debate. Let's learn from one another. That's okay, as long as we're continuing to make some progress, in our own low power stations, right? And respect for one another is probably an important thing. So,
Amen.
6 o'clock tonight, downstairs in the ballroom. Thank you guys for being here. And you guys have a wonderful day.
I wasn't going to throw a wrench in it.
You good?
It was too late. What I wanted to hear from you, and it's too late for this, but if you guys agree on 95%, would you encourage those who are pushing for a completely separate 5G that the better way to go is the way you two talked about, push for a hybrid?
I'm already doing it.
Yeah, but
There's no question.
yes, of course.
That's the second one. Life is hard, it's harder than India.
I got to hit the head, Dennis. I'll be